Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about contingency provision in a project finance deal. Okay, so we started with this topic of negotiation of contracts using your financial models, and in the previous blog post and video I discussed the debt service reserve account, issues related to debt service reserve account, and the term sheet. I will put the link down below if you're interested to have a look at it, but today we're going to talk about another interesting and important topic, which is contingency provision in a project finance and in a project finance model. So just before we start, for those of you who don't know me, hi, my name is Hediye. I made financial modeling my profession as well as my passion. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. Okay, so as we said, contingency provision is one of the important topics that needs to be discussed with different stakeholders in a project, lenders, sponsors, and the government, and all the parties involved in a project. So what is contingency provision? As you know, in a project finance deal, everything is basically relied on the cash flow projections. So lenders, when they are looking at a project, they don't have much security to back up their debt service and the principal repayments of their debt. So they only rely on the cash flow projections. And when it comes to the construction phase, so the sponsors will come with a package to the lenders. They will say, okay, this is what we evaluated as the total project cost in order to bring this project from a feasibility study to completion, to commercial operation date. We need all these costs, and they're going to list all the categories of costs. They're going to say, this is my construction contractor cost. Sometimes they refer EPC. So they say, this is how much I need to pay to my contractor. This is how much I need to pay for the insurance provider. This is how much I need to put the NSPV budget for the construction program and advisory and all the other costs. So they say, that's what I estimated. Let's say they say 10 million for a small solar project. Let's say that they say, okay, this is my 10 million total project cost, and I want to finance it with 70%, 30% gearing. So the lenders will say how much they will give as loan. So they will come up with a maximum gearing, and the project will be financed with debts and equity or other financing instruments throughout the construction phase, because as you know, during the construction, a project finance deal, it doesn't have any revenue, so we need to fund it. The construction phase needs to be funded with debt and equity. Okay, so lenders and everybody, when they look at these, even sponsors, when they look at the budget, because future is uncertain, we all know that unexpected things might happen. So always we put kind of like a contingency provision inside the total project cost, just in case for unexpected event. There might be some delays in the construction, there might be some cost overruns. So anything that might kind of cause and cost overrun beyond what we estimated during the feasibility study as the total project cost, we're gonna just estimate a kind of a provision as an additional cost for unexpected event. So sometimes it is estimated as 5 to 10% of total project cost, or 5 to 10% of one of the main components of the cost. So that's how we estimate, and that's the amount that is going to be provided in the budget for the unexpected event. Okay, so that's what we call a contingency provision. So now we're going to discuss about the different type of contingency provisions. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about funded contingency. Funded contingency is a type of contingency that is included in the project budget and is funded by debt and equity. So as we said, when you first submit your proposal to the lenders will have a look at each of the cost estimates, and they will kind of discuss it with their technical advisors, and they will all see whether they are okay with your estimated cost, whether they think that the costs are basically representing the realities of the project, and whether it's the base case, whether they can use it as their base case. So everybody will come up with their base case, and this is also true when it comes to contingency provisions. So sponsors will send a package to the lenders, and they will include a certain amount of contingency provision, let's say 5 to 10% of EPC or total project cost as a contingency. They will include it, and it's going to be presented as a line item clearly shown in the sources and uses of funds. Basically, in the uses of funds statement, there will be a contingency provision line so that lenders can identify that, okay, the sponsor have assumed a certain amount of money for unexpected events. And then the advisors and the technical and all the advisors will come and evaluate whether this contingency provision is enough or not with their perspective, with their risk appetites. So as we know, lenders are mainly more conservative. They are actually the main shareholders in most of the project finance deal. They have maybe between 15 to 18% of the total project cost is funded with debt. So that's why they are very much concerned about the riskiness of the project. So what lenders usually they do is that they will have a more conservative approach, and they will come up with a contingency provision which is higher than what the sponsors will consider in their base case. And that is because, as we said, lenders are more conservative. So if you look at the bell curve, let's say that this is contingency and this is the probability distribution for the contingency provision. Lenders will look at the 50%. So if let's say that, the technical advisors, they will come and say that based on this project, there is 50% chance that there will be a cost overrun of around like $500,000, okay? However, there is a 90% that the cost overrun will be around $700K. So the lenders will say, okay, because I'm more conservative, I will go with the P90 case, I will go with the probability of 90% probability, and I will use a higher contingency. And the sponsors will go for a lower contingency provision. Okay, so that's all depends on the appetite, on the risk appetite of the different stakeholders involved when it comes to sizing of the contingency provision. So as we said, this funded contingency, there will be a lot of discussions during the term sheet negotiation and during the appraisal of the project about the sizing of this contingency and the different topics that we will discuss as we go through this video. So for now, I hope that you understood what is the concept of funded contingency, and it's going to be one cost among other project costs included in the project budget. And here, as you can see, I have an example of a summary sources and uses of funds. As you can see, the contingency provision is highlighted, and you can clearly see how much contingency provision has been devoted for this project. Okay, so regarding the sizing of the contingency, I think I already touched on that about the risk appetite and lenders and sponsors. So however, let's just wrap it up. Regarding the sizing of this contingency, it also depends on where you are in terms of the appraisal of the project. So at the beginning, when you just started with the appraisal, you didn't yet maybe even started negotiating with different contractors, you're just receiving bids from the different construction contractor. So nothing is yet firmed up. So at that stage, maybe you want to be more conservative and you want to maybe include a higher contingency. And lenders will also have that approach at the beginning when they come into the deal. They say, okay, we don't yet have an EPC price, firm EPC price. We didn't sign the contract with the insurance provider. So nothing is yet very cleared and signed and sealed. So let's have a higher contingency provision. And as we go along, as we start signing contract so maybe we have an EPC contract, which is like a turnkey, which is like a fixed price contract. So maybe the risk would be lower at that stage when you have this clarity about the contractor and the type of contract that you're signing. So maybe the EPC cost can go lower as things will get more clear during the appraisal stage. So that's one thing to consider regarding the timing. The other thing, as we said, is who are you considering? Whose base case are you considering? As we said, lenders are more conservative and sponsors might look look at the contingency provision differently than what the lenders will think. So that's also something that you need to consider. And you might have a two base case for lenders and sponsors, and one of the differences might be contingency. Okay, so that's about sizing of contingency. Of course, most of the things related to the sizing of the contingency will come from the technical studies that are done, so that the technical advisors from the sponsor side and from the lender side will have a better view of the risks, during construction, and they will tell you exactly how much contingency provision is required for the project. But if you're at the beginning stage, then you might just go with a 5%, 10% cost estimate based on previous project or based on what it is common in that industry. Okay, so that's about sizing. The next thing that is important as well to discuss and to also model is regarding when are you going to assume that this contingency cost is spent. So for example, if you have a hydro project which takes 3 years to 5 years to build, then you want to see, okay, I am assuming that there will be a 5 million contingency provision. So in my construction program, where am I going to put this 5 million? Am I going to put it right at the beginning of the construction, and then there will be interest, accumulated throughout the construction for that 5 million? Or shall I put it just right at the end and assume that, okay, the project will go along as planned, and just in the last construction period, I will have this 5 million extra cost, something unexpected will happen, and I will have this 5 million extra cost? Or shall I just distribute it evenly throughout the construction? So that's something that you need to consider again with the advisors. They will have a better view of the risk and when is the riskiest part of the construction. Maybe it's geothermal, maybe there are some kind of drilling involved for the construction, and that's when the risk is higher, that maybe they will find something that requires some additional cost. So you will ask the advisor and they will tell you exactly maybe how to spread the contingency provision throughout the construction program. So, but however, if you don't have the technical studies yet, putting it right at front is kind of like overestimation, It's that all the cost overrun happens at the beginning is kind of an overestimation. If you put everything right at the end, that's also an underestimation, because normally it might happen somewhere in between, right? So I would say the best is to either look at your cost items, and the major cost item, the one that is like beyond 50% of the total project cost, follow that same payment curve, or either just spread it evenly throughout the construction. However, just putting it as a bullet point might not be very realistic. Okay, so that's about the payments of this contingency. The next one, which is also very important, and there will be a lot of discussions around it, is who's going to get if things go well and we don't spend this contingency. Let's say, we have 1 million in the project as contingency, but we come to the construction and the managers have done a great job and we only spent 500,000. Okay, so we are left with 500,000 and the construction is finished and we are ready to go to operation. So what's going to happen to that remaining contingency? Can we distribute it as dividends? Can it be used to pay back the loan? Or can it go to kind of reduce the tariff for the project if you are in some kind of offtake agreement? So what's going to happen to that? That's a discussion that you need to have during the appraisal, and it's going to be, of course, in all the contracts that you have. How you're going to spend that on contingency provision, unspent contingency provision will be a discussion. So it can be, as I said, it can be all either allowed to be distributed as dividends, but they might not let you to distribute right after construction ends. They say, okay, let's keep it in a reserve account for like a couple of years, for 1 year, towards operation. Let's still keep it, and then we can release it as dividends. So timing is also important, when you're going to distribute that. Or they might say that lenders will say, okay, let's just use the full unspent contingency or a share of it to pay back the loan as under the cash sweep. So it's going to go through the cash flow waterfall and a percentage is going to go back to repay the loan. That might be the case. Or if, as I said, if it's an offtake agreement and you're negotiating a tariff, the off-taker might say that, okay, if you didn't spend this additional money, you're going to reduce the tariff by that same amount. So you have to rerun the financial model and come up with a new tariff with that cost reduction. Okay, so these are all the topics that I found interesting to be discussed around the funded contingency. Now we're going to also quickly go to the unfunded contingency provision. Okay, so about unfunded contingency. Unfunded contingency is about the cost overrun that goes beyond the contingency, the funded contingency provision that you have in your budget. So the question is, what if we have a cost overrun beyond the contingency provision that we have provided in the budget? Then what's going to happen? Who's going to fund the additional cost beyond the total project cost? And most of the time, this unfunded contingency will be funded with equity only. So lenders will say, okay, sponsors, if we have a cost overrun of most of the time there will be a kind of like a limit to that provision. So they will say up to 10 million, 5 million, whatever. You as sponsor, you need to put the money to fund the cost overrun beyond the total project cost that has been budgeted. So remember, the unfunded contingency, as the name says, it is not included in the project budget. Okay, so there is no budget for it. However, there is just a kind of agreement between lenders and sponsors that the sponsors will kind of provide this money. So how to back this up? Most of the time it is backed up by a letter of credit. Okay, so the sponsors are required to provide a letter of credit to say that, for this 10 million, I will put the cash. So this is kind of needs to be renewed throughout the construction, or even 1 or 2 years after the construction. They require you to have and keep the letter of credit to show that you are there in case things go wrong. Okay, so as we said, the first discussion is by how much sizing of that unfunded contingency is important. And this next discussion is for how long do you need to keep that unfunded contingency? At some point the sponsor will say, okay, enough construction is done, so we need to just close this, right? So, but that's also a discussion that you need to have. Sometimes lenders might require it to kind of be there up to like 1 year beyond construction. They call it, sometimes the legal term is the financial completion date. However, that's also another flexibility that you need to provide in your financial model of up to which point you need to have this unfunded contingency, and the sizing of it. You also need to provide flexibility for it. Another thing that you need to consider when it comes to unfunded contingency is the LC fee. So there is a fee, right, that you need to pay, an annual, whatever, periodic fee that you need to pay for that LC. So who's going to pay for it? That's another discussion that will be a topic of discussion between sponsor and lenders. Who's going to pay the fee? Is it an SPV cost, or should it be paid from the sponsor's budget directly? Okay, so that's another flexibility that you need to provide in the model and test that. Most of the time it's rational to think that because during construction the project doesn't generate any revenues, so most of the time it should be kind of as part of the project budget. However, that really depends on the legal laws, whether they allow it or not. So that's also something that is project specific and depends on the discussion that you have. So these are the flexibilities that you need to provide about the sizing, about the fee, and about the timing, and about the LC fee, who's going to pay for it, and how to kind of model it. It's just providing all these flexibilities when it comes to unfunded contingency. However, one thing that you have to keep in mind, which is kind of obvious, is that unfunded contingency will not be triggered during the base case. Okay, it might be triggered during the down cases, when you have a stress case, when you increase capex by certain percentages and you have a fixed debt. So your debt is sized, you have a maximum ceiling for all your senior tranches, and then if you have a cost overrun, which will be beyond your budgeted total project cost and beyond the maximum commitments from lenders, that's when you have to tap into that unfunded equity. Okay, so that's how you need to model it. You need to take that into account. If you are modeling it, you need to consider that in the base case it should not be triggered. It should be only triggered only if you have a cost overrun beyond a certain point. That's when you have to trigger beyond the maximum debt commitment. That's when you have to tap into this unfunded contingency. Okay, so now let's look at one of my financial models, and I'm going to take you through the modeling of the contingency provision. So now I'm on my input sheet, and I have a section for the capital cost, right? So in this section for the capital cost, I have listed all the main what I call capex items, physical capex. They're not financial. The interest during construction and commitment fees, upfront fees, and funding of debt service reserve account, all of them will come as part of the budget. However, these are all the basically physical construction cost. And I have listed them all here. As you see, among these costs, I have a cost item called contingency. Okay, as you see that it's color coded differently, meaning that it is coming from somewhere else, right? It is not directly an input. So the input is here. So I am putting like 6.5% of the EPC cost, which is here, you see the 120 million euros. I am putting it as contingency in my base case model. So it's going to be around 7.8 million. So as we said, that's something that you need to discuss with lenders, and you will need to discuss it with your technical advisors and get their opinion about what should be the right amount of contingency provision. And you also have to provide flexibility in your models to kind of be able to change this contingency provision. Okay, so for here I had it expressed as a percentage of EPC. It might be expressed as a percentage of another cost item, or sometimes expressed as a percentage of total project cost. That's going to cause a circular reference, and you need to include it as in your macro, however you're solving your circular reference, whether it's a copy and paste, whether it's Edward Butmer's method of user-defined function. However you want to solve it, it needs to be included in the macro because it's causing a circular reference if it is as a percentage of total project cost. Okay, so here it is just expressed as a percentage of EPC. Okay, so I do my calculations in my capex sheet, and when I come to my dashboard, that's where I present the as you can see, this is the summary, sources and uses of fund. It's the same, similar to what I showed you in the slides. As you can see here, when anybody who opens the model and comes to the dashboard can simply see that, okay, right in the cost items, they will see that there is a 5% of total project cost, which is included as contingency. So that 7.8 million that you see here is just for unexpected events, okay? The second thing that we discussed was about the flexibility, about how we're gonna spend this contingency. Okay, so as you can see here, I have a line item here for the percentages for EPC. So I can modify it. I can put it, this is like around, like, I don't know, 33 months. So I will either spread it, equally throughout the construction, or I will just put it in certain periods when I know that the project has higher risk. So you will see that it is quite flexible in changing the contingency provision for the spending of the contingency provision. We also need to provide that flexibility. So I would think that that's all you need when it comes to contingency provision in terms of the modeling of it. Now let's go and have a quick look at the unspent contingency. So in this model, I have already discussed with my lenders, and the lenders, they said that, okay, senior lender one said, I can only give you up to 30 million. The second one said, I can give you up to 22 million. And the third one, I think, is giving up to 18 million. So as you can see, we still have some room. If we have a cost overrun, we can still draw down on the loan. And the 50 million is also another fixed kind of commitment from lender 4. So in total, I have, I think, around 120 million is the maximum commitment. Okay, but in my base case, I'm only drawing on 117.8 million for 75% gearing. Okay, so that's the base case. Now I have to, in that base case, I will not tap into my contingent equity, right? So as you can see here in this section, I am listing my contingency provision. So this is basically 3 million. Sorry, I need to color code it. I usually use the generic macro, but I don't want to slow it down. So you see that I have a 3 million contingent equity. That's something that has been agreed between sponsors and lenders. And there is a cost to it. For the LC is 3%. Another flexibility as a parameter is the interest on LC payable every 1 month, means that it's payable on monthly basis. Sometimes it's semi-annual, or sometimes it is on quarterly basis. So I provided the flexibility to the payment of this LC cost. The other thing that we said that you need to provide flexibility is for how long do you need to keep that contingent equity. So in this case, I said 1 year post COD, you still need to keep it. If you put it as 0, it means that after the construction is completed, you no longer need that contingency anymore. And of course, the other one that is also subject to discussion about who's going to pay for the LC fee, right? So if it is, so I provided a switch here. When the switch is to true, this means that the LC is paid directly from the shareholder's pocket. So it's not funded with debt and equity. It's not part of the total project cost. So it's funded by shareholders. And if it is to false, if it is set to false, this means that this is going to be provided as part of the total project cost, budgeted and paid out by the sponsors and equity by lenders and sponsors as part of the gearing. Okay, so these are the flexibilities that you need to provide. Okay, now let's say that we are running some sensitivities. Let's go to the sensitivity sheet, and I'm going to switch to my scenario number 2. So scenario number 2 says that I'm going to apply a 10% increase in my capex items. So I'm sorry, just before we go into the sensitivity, let's kind of look at the base case. So we looked at the base case briefly, what I want to record it. So the total project cost under the base case is 157. That might be lender's base case. I don't know what sponsor's base case. That's not the question. I think it's the lender's base case because that's how we are sizing the debt, right? So let's first of all save the results, the IRRs and the minimum debt service cover ratio and everything under the base case and compare it with the sensitivity case. I am using this template by Edward Bodmer. I'm going to put the link down below. That's going to kind of help me save different scenarios and then compare them. So it's a very simple worksheet with 2 buttons to copy scenarios and to clear them. So you just need to define your metrics and link them to your model. So for example, I link them to my CapEx. As you see, all of them are linked to the dashboard. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this scenario. I'm going to call it base case. So it's a simple copy and paste as values. Okay, it's not doing much. It's just copy and pasting it as values. So it is recorded. Sorry, I am on my French. Okay. So the base case is like this. I save the metrics and now I want to compare it and show you what's going to happen in this case when I have a fixed debt and I have a cost overrun, what's going to happen to the project metrics. So let's now switch to scenario number 2. This means that we are applying a 10% cost overrun. So unfortunately I have a copy and paste macro here, so I am running the copy and paste macro. So as you can see, the project, now we have a higher project cost, you see, and as a result you see that the IRR went down from 17% to 13%. Ratios didn't move much. Why? Because the debt is fixed. So now you are just drawing on the maximum debt ceiling that you had of 122. So beyond that, you can no longer raise more debt. So you're going to tap into equity. So your equity will be higher, in this case, the equity that is drawn. So just for the sake of comparison, we're going to save it 10% capex up. And you will see that, okay, so we can even do a delta just, to see and report it to the managers if they need, of what's going to be the impact of this increase. So it's going to cause around 3.6% in terms of IRR. As you see, the DSCR is not changing because you are not increasing, you are just increasing your debts by 2 million, I guess. So it's not really affecting the ratios, but it's really hurting the equity. Okay, so if there are any cost overrun beyond that, so that's why it is so important, for the shareholders to kind of remain, in the budget that they have estimated, because if in the case that they have to tap into equity is expensive and it's going to cost them a lot, right? So that's the importance of modeling it and showing the impact to the management for decision making. So, okay, so we are done. I hope you found this tutorial useful. I will see what I can do next. I had some requests from you talking about the refinancing. And so that's another topic that I'm thinking. I'm just trying to kind of educate myself as well before I kind of do a tutorial on it. I want to make sure that I cover everything in the tutorial, and everything that is downloadable, I'm going to put the link down below. All right, so I hope to see you in my next video. Thank you. Bye. If you want to learn how to build better financial models, check out my online course on financial model spreadsheet design at courses.phoenixmode.com.